Hello, Smart Money Tree podcast listeners. Welcome to this week's show. My name is Kirk Chisholm. I'll be your host, and today I'm joined with my good friend Doug Hagerin. Hey, Doug.
Happy Monday. Good to see you. I
happy
believe
Monday.
Kirk's coming off vacation today. So, while many places, I don't know about where you're at, but we're starting. Today's the first day of school in our part of the country. So, kids are coming off vacation. Kirk's coming off vacation. When does school start for you guys?
Next week, technically on Labor Day.
Okay.
Not that week, on Labor Day. So
on Labor Day,
yeah.
They published that as the first day of school was on Labor Day.
So it's funny. So I always take like the third week of August off as my vacation, and then I usually take the following week off to prep for start of school, and also that's this week, and just kind of like get situated for the year. Now, normally I have my vacation beard going because I just don't shave all week, and but my oldest shaved for the first time on vacation. So I wanted him to do it. So his face was like, healthy with all the seawater. Anyway, so I had to show him. I did it with him. So I don't have the full beard this time as I normally do. But yeah, technically I'm still on vacation. And my oldest goes to high school. His first day is orientation on Labor Day. Now, I don't know who came up with this. I think it's a horrible idea. I would rather do it on a Sunday before Labor Day. But whatever, hey, it is what it is. So I think in college they kind of ignore Labor Day anyway. So, but yeah, my first day for him is Monday, and then my youngest, I think the first day is Wednesday. And oddly enough, my oldest, his first actual day of school is on Thursday. So they have him come in, orient for 3 days, maybe one day. I don't even know. I haven't even looked at it yet. We're trying to figure that out this week, but it's very weird. It's very weird. But I know a lot of parts of the country, their kids are already in school, and people are like, yeah, whatever, man. This is another vacation.
Well, I always laugh because for us, they seem to like start the first week of school, but then the first week of school has like already Friday comes, and then there's like, and then all of a sudden it's closed again, right? They're off. It's like, why didn't we just start it the next week? That seems to make a lot more sense. But I'm gonna vent for a second here, Kirk, because it's just kind of a little bit of an indictment of our education system, not in a total terribly pessimistic way, but my daughter's in the pep band, so they had asked her the pep band to come and play for the teachers last week because the teachers are in their pre-start meetings and all of that stuff. And there's a lot going on. Parents have to bring the kids in or a band. Band's gotta, these kids that get hyped up, ready to go. They've been working on the stuff. They get there, and it's supposed to be a half an hour. Pep band. When you're doing pep band, you're doing a lot of pop songs that people know. They play them at the games. They're like what, 15-second, 30-second segments, snippets. It's not like you're playing the whole song. They get there. They're thinking 30 minutes. 30 minutes, they could play a whole like plethora of different songs. They tell them we only have time for one song. They show up. And this is my indictment. The whole time they're playing that one song, teachers, now, mind you, I've talked to a couple of teachers like, we didn't really have time for that. We just want to get back to what we want. That's fine. I understand. Administration should have coordinated that with you. But simultaneously, they are playing, and all the teachers in the audience are like talking to each other and ignoring it. And I'm sitting there going, well, let's reverse this for a second. Let's imagine it's the middle of the school year, and the teachers are bringing their students down to the auditorium to watch any performance whatsoever. What would they expect of those kids? To shut up, sit there, pay attention, and be respectful. But there wasn't a single reciprocation of that when they were asked to sit there and listen. And actually, some of the comments were, we didn't have time for this and weren't interested. Kids aren't interested in a lot of things we teach them in education. It's just very frustrating to me that this is that do as I do as I say, don't do as I do kind of mentality. And, unfortunately, this is just kind of to parents that are listening out there, stay involved. Reminder to stay involved, because ultimately the most consistent and respected voice that their kids are going to hear will always be yours. But you got to be there having that voice all the time, because if you just pop in to give that voice now and then, they're not going to listen to you either. But it was very frustrating. So kids jumped through hoops to be there, then basically told, we don't want you there. and they were also basically shown they didn't want them there by how they respected them. So anyway, that's my vent.
No, I'm with you, man. Sounds like you need to send your kids to a different school. Or, it's another reminder that your schools are not raising your kids. You as parents are.
Yeah. I mean, we've been to private schools. We've been to public schools. I've seen it all different ways. I don't know if it matters. I think it's just a reminder. You need to raise your own kids, because unfortunately the messaging that they're getting out there, and kids aren't stupid, right? They see it. They're like, you tell them to be quiet. They don't see you being quiet because you're an adult. You got to show them by example. So,
yeah, it's funny you say that, because I talk to my kids a lot, and every once in a while I kind of throw in a comment to see how they react to it, because you don't know what they're teaching your kids. I kind of know what they're teaching the kids, and I don't love all of it, but I was throwing a comment. The kids know, like the kids know when it's BS, like when people are shoving BS down their throat. Kids get it. Like I knew as a kid too. You just shut your mouth. You're like, okay, yeah, sounds great. Yeah, like they know. Like my kids are asking me questions about politics last night. I'm like, oh, where'd you hear that? They're like, oh, I heard on TikTok. I'm like, well, maybe you shouldn't be learning on TikTok. But we had some conversations, and they pick up things really quick. But if you're not teaching your kids, then they're learning from TikTok. And I don't want the Chinese teaching my kids. I don't want teachers unions teaching my kids. Like I got to teach my kids how life works. And if I don't know, I won't get into a political rant, but it is interesting now that I guess officially Kamala is the DNC candidate, even though no one voted for her. Which I find fascinating, by the way. So nothing about politics, because frankly, neither party is talking about policy. Trump is a little bit more, and he's been there before, so you kind of know where he stands. But Kamala's not talking about policy at all. Why? Because the policies that her administration had, people didn't like so much. And what I find interesting, and it's nothing about policy, because my opinion is right or wrong, just like everybody else's, right? And my opinion isn't the opinion. But I will say, I find it interesting that we haven't heard from her yet, other than the DNC convention. And I'm curious, and here's my thinking. So I've talked to a lot of friends who are deeply in politics, some on the left, some on the right. And what I find interesting is, like, all of them said the same thing, is that the smartest thing she could do is stay off camera, don't debate, just hide for the next few months. That's her best chance of success. Now, do we live in a country where your best chance of success is hiding in the basement and giving no interviews and let the press do it for you? That's
40 years ago, maybe. Not now.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. It's an interesting strategy, and look, politics is politics, and this is why I don't like politics, because it's all BS. But like, I look at it and say, if she doesn't do a debate, if she doesn't get in front of an interview for the next few months and gets elected, that says something about our country. Is that you're willing to just vote for somebody without knowing where they stand. Just saying. So not saying she's good or bad. I mean, I don't know. I haven't heard anything from her in like pretty much 4 years, because typically the vice president's usually stuck in a closet. It's not really their role to be a powerful figure. So it's not really a knock against her. It's like any vice president. Their job is to be there, not to outshadow the president. So you don't really know. They're just kind of along for the ride. But it would be nice to see what she has to say. It'd be nice to see a debate. It'd be nice to see all that if you're going to vote for somebody. But anyway, so we're going to election season. Go ahead, Doug. Do you want to say something?
Yeah, and again, we don't endorse either candidate here. I like to try to stay, central in terms of opinion. So I think you brought up something that's really interesting. I think, again, staying silent. If we elect someone who's been silent, that says a lot, because especially in this day and age of social media, there's always something to be heard or said, and people expect that. It was a big, social media has been a big part of, several of the last elections. The other thing, and again, I will say this as a counter to some of the, anti-Harris policy, commentary, is, some of the people are like, hey, there's a lot of memes going out there, both sides. There's plenty of memes going on around Trump too. So let's just, again, this is not to say one or the other, but one of the things that people are coming out and saying, it's like, she's saying, hey, we're going to change over the next 4 years if I'm elected. And people are like, that's really funny. You're going to change what you're already in power and control of doing as the, you already have the office. But you just pointed out something I think people don't understand. The VP doesn't have power. If you go back to Johnson versus Kennedy, very, very different policies, right? They only added Johnson so that they could get that Southern vote that would help Kennedy from Boston to be able to get the election. They didn't see eye to eye. So just because Kennedy's in power and Johnson, might be running, doesn't mean that Johnson would necessarily have the same, endorse or the same policies as the current president, because the VP doesn't have that power. So one of the things I do find that's kind of interesting as a meme about that, it's like, it's funny. Harris says she's going to change everything. She's already in power. She's not in power. Like whatever Biden wanted to do as president, just because she's VP doesn't mean she is for or a promoter of those same policies. Now, of course, in rhetoric, she's going to be, because you as VP, you got to be out there speaking for your party and speaking for your president. But that doesn't mean that naturally everything that the Biden administration has put out there as policy is what Harris would do as the same policy. So again, I'm going to say this to everybody. Watch what you hear in snippets. Watch what you hear in memes. Watch what you hear in these things that make fun of it, because it's like she's not in power right now. She has no control over what's going on. She's, as you said, mostly shoved into a closet, there to do really little more than, shake hands and obviously cast deciding votes when the Senate is tied, which again, you do get to watch that. But people will be held accountable to the group that she's tied to that. Now, I am, again, not endorsing her by any means. This is just realize, again, think for yourself. Make sure that when you go into the election season, regardless of whether or not you're pro-Trump, pro-Harris, Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, Green Party, or whatever, there is really, two-party system, basically one. Just make sure that you're really doing your research and thinking for yourself, because we are in a system right now, especially with social media, that it has become easier to force you to think for them, but you think you're thinking for yourself. It's that, going back to that echo chamber that we talk about. So,
yeah, I will say in other news, obviously, Kennedy supported Trump, which I started reading some articles about this, and I'm fascinated with some of the strategery that people are talking about. You never know, because you always see this. You never know what's true and what's not, other than what they say. But I did see this really funny fake news article title, and I think we can all laugh at this. It said, "Trump adds a Kennedy in hopes he will draw all the sniper fire." I mean, I have to say this: I love comedy in all forms, even the stuff I don't agree with, and I just love comedy. And I will say that, in the old days, comedy was restricted to comedians, but now everybody's a comedian out there, and it's why I love. It's the only thing I really love about social media, is because you see some of the funniest stuff from the most mundane people that just have a great sense of humor. And that, I thought that was brilliant. And was it too soon, Doug? Too soon to make a joke about Kennedy?
Well, it's only been 60 years. But
yeah.
What's funny when you say that the comedians were the only ones that were allowed to make jokes. The interesting thing is today, it's almost as if the comedians are the only ones not allowed to make jokes, because so many people do make humor behind, the faceless, anonymous world of social media, that, these days the comedians are all basically walking on eggshells, trying not to offend people. And it's really, really tamed down what the level of comedy, or especially if you go back generations, comedy and wit, even with Shakespeare, right? Comedy and wit was one of the few things that people could use to attack the bourgeoisie, right? Mm-hmm. To really kind of level that playing field. They knew they were never going to move up because of the class system from where they were. They were never going to be royalty. They were never going to be nobility. They were never even going to be, the landowners or the wealthy by any means. But what they could do to even the playing field was using humor and wit and cutting at that. And the irony of today is a lot of those that were the best at it are now, scared to use that talent at the degree in which it could be effective. And you go back, some of the best comedies of, comedians of the 60s, 70s, 80s, a lot of that they can't do today, unfortunately. And they're afraid to.
I know. It's a scary time when you can't speak your mind. I mean, if you think about art, like comedy's an art, and art is meant to, as you said, Doug, poke your finger at whoever. Like that's the whole point, is that it pushes the envelope, causes people to think. I mean, you think of all these weird swirls of paint on a canvas that people spend hundreds of millions of dollars for. Some of it is meant to inspire, some of it's meant to be thought provoking, some of it's meant to get you thinking, like all those things, right? And comedy, much the same. Like it's meant to push the envelope. It is always the funniest stuff, always pushes the envelope. You think of like Richard Pryor back in the day. You think of all these old school comedians that really pushed the envelope, and they were great, right? And they were hilarious in part because they pushed. I mean, look at Dave Chappelle, right? Dave Chappelle, arguably one of the best, if not the best comedians of our time. Even comedians look at him as like the GOAT. Like he is just really that good. And he comes out and does a Netflix special where he basically rips on LGBTQ or trans people. And he subsequently gets canceled and, basically had some guy tried to attack him on the stage, like just the craziness, like the mental illness going on out there about that. And here's a guy whose whole job is to poke fun at, what's going on in the world. I mean, look at Jerry Seinfeld. He would just find comedy in everyday life, right? That's the comedian's job, is to find the comedy in things going on. And Dave Chappelle's brilliant. I mean, like I said, I respect his abilities immensely, because to be able to do what he can do, even not many comedians can do that. And so, to see a guy like that get canceled and other people get canceled or afraid to do comedy because they're afraid of the backlash, it's like, where do we live? Now, fortunately, the pendulum's swinging back. And I want to get into some financial stuff because I don't think people want to hear our politics. But, if you think about culture, and this actually impacts financial markets. If you think about culture, what happens is, as my dad always used to say, culture is like a pendulum. It swings back and forth. It'll swing the extreme one side, and then it'll extreme the other side. Back and forth, back and forth. It's the way our culture works. So we went to the extreme left, where all the cuckoos on the left got all the power, and they got the microphone, and the moderate lefties are just like, hey man, like, do your thing. Like, I support you. Until they realize, like, hey, you're coming for me too. And they're like, all right, you're done. You're canceled. We're going to take the power back. And now it's swinging back to the right because everyone is sick of the extreme left having power. And then it'll swing back to the right. And then people will be sick of that. And they'll swing back to left and right. So, for anyone who doesn't think that's happening, you're missing it, because it's happened for decades. It's not new. It happened since I was a kid. My dad was talking to me about this in the 70s and 80s. And it's just the way things work, right? So as bad as you think things get, that's actually what causes it to go the other way. Because even my Democrat friends who were just, they were supportive of, the far left cuckoos, even they were just like, you know what, this has gone too far. And when they say it's gone too far, they're the ones who are not that far left, the ones who actually have the power, just decide to say, all right, we're gonna move this back towards the middle because we think it's gone too far. And that's what causes it goes back and forth, right? So, all of this is come to kind of like basically aggregation of, here's what this means for you, is that when you look at trends tend to go in one direction until it gets to the extreme. Once it gets to the extreme, when people, even people who are kind of supporting that are just like, you know what, this has gone too far, right? If you look at bubbles, like you look at the late 90s and the tech bubble, it got to a point where people were like, you know what, this has gone too far. I'm going to cash out. I'm going to take my money out. And a lot of people didn't and lost a lot of money. But many people did, where they're like, all right, it's gone too far. It's time to go back the other way. And so when you're thinking about any sort of financial trend or market trend, you need to understand that things don't always go in one direction forever. And what tends to move them back in the other direction is the fact that they're at the extreme, right? So there's a concept of what I call reversion to the mean. Now, reversion to the mean is the way it works is let's just say you take a S&P 500 stock chart of the last like 50 years, right? It goes up and down, up and down. The trend is up, right? Let's hypothetically say the trend is a 45-degree angle. I don't know what the degree is, but let's just say 45 degrees, right? So the trend sometimes is at 10 degrees, sometimes it's at 90, right? Or 85, right? And it goes up and down, and it fluctuates like a wave around this trend, right? Up and down, up and down. But the direction is still up, right? However, if you go too extreme in one direction, so let's say it's a 45-degree angle, and instead of going 45 degrees, you're actually going like 85 degrees. You're going much higher than the trend is. At some point, you're going to revert back to the mean. Now, the way it works is you don't revert back to the mean. You revert beyond the mean, right? So if you think about it like this, think about the trend, the 45-degree angle. Think of that as like the ocean, right? So the ocean is the equilibrium. That is the surface. Now, let's say you take a beach ball and you shove it under the water, right, as far as you can go. And it's way below the surface, and there's pressure pulling it up. So you let go of the beach ball, and it goes flying up, right? Well, it doesn't stop at the surface. It flies up beyond the surface and goes in the air and then lands on the surface, and that's where it finds its balance. So I always think of the market like that. Anytime it goes extreme in one direction, it reverts back to the other direction, and then it centers on equilibrium. So the reason I bring this up is when you go to extreme in one direction, it doesn't just hit the mean. It goes beyond that. And if you look at something like the 200-day moving average, which is typically how kind of the markets look at it as the quote-unquote equilibrium in a sense, it's not always necessarily the case, but it's kind of a marker that is a good general rule of thumb. So if it's above the 200-day moving average, it's bullish. If it's below, it's bearish. And so the more data you have, the better trend line you can pull. So if you're looking at the markets trying to decide, should I invest, should I not invest, how far from the 200-day moving average or kind of like the trend are you? If you're really one far extreme, then maybe it's a little riskier to jump in than not. And if it's too far below, at some point, the buyers come in and say, all right, it's gone too far. We're going to come in and buy. Right? If it goes too far to the upside, people come in and say, all right, it's gone too far. I'm going to sell. And so that's what causes this volatility. That's what causes the markets to go up and down, is the fact that some people think that it's too expensive or too cheap, and they're buying and selling accordingly. So if you're looking at whether you should invest in the market, understand the trends. Even if you're a value-oriented investor, and I am as well. I love that aspect of investing. Unfortunately, the market hasn't respected it in the last 15 years. So people who are value-oriented have underperformed. And it's not that they're doing a bad job. It's just that the market is not respecting value investing anymore. And I'm not going to get into this week because it's kind of a light week. Everyone's on vacation. It's for Labor Day. I'll get into it again. I mentioned it to a few weeks ago on how I've kind of reformulated my thinking around the macro environment. And I've talked to a few people recently. I'm going to mention this quick, and then we're going to move to some charts and some other things that Doug brought up. I'm also going to talk. We also want to talk about the Fed speak at Jackson Hole last week, which I think is really important, and it kind of confirms a lot of what the market was assuming. But if you're looking at trends, and here's been my, I'm just gonna make this one point before we get into macro stuff next week. So, I've owned a home for a number of years, and I sold 2 years ago or something like that. And I sold my condo, moved to the suburbs, and I've been renting. And I've talked about this a lot in the show. And I've been renting because my thinking was, hey, real estate prices are way too high because interest rates are basically have doubled the monthly payments. So real estate prices have to decline in order for people to afford them. What I didn't realize is too many people had too much money. They didn't care, and everyone's willing to keep buying. So not only has real estate become twice as expensive, it's actually become, in some cases, a lot more than that because real estate prices have gone up 30, 50%, some cases 100% in the last 5 years, which is ridiculous, but it happened. And so, I look at this and say, all right, well, obviously I'm missing something. So this is an educational bit right here. We talk about how I made my mistake and how to keep you from making yours. My mistake was that I looked at the data and said, this is the rational thing to think, is that interest rates are higher, monthly payments are double. There's no way people can afford this, yet they are. So there's something wrong in my analysis. Now, what's wrong? Well, we talked about this in the show. We had a few guests on talking about supply and demand. So supply and demand is obviously an important thing. Is that the only thing? No. But I think the challenge is too many people have too much money. And I think that was my error, is too many people had too much money and they're willing to spend it on ridiculousness. Now, there's obviously also a lot of people who want to sell and can't because rates are high. Now, if I own, let's say, $1 million house, and it's appreciated a lot in the last 30 years, and now it's $1 million, and I want to sell and downsize. Okay, so I'm going to downsize to, let's say, a $500,000 house. Well, the problem is the monthly the interest rates have gone up from 3% up to 7.5%. It's not now; it's 7, but let's say 7.5. Well, now my monthly payments have doubled. So effectively, if I own the home with a mortgage, they haven't doubled. But if I were to buy a new house, if I were to sell my $1 million house and buy a $500,000 house with the same ratios, my payments are the same. They're the same. So why would I sell my nice house to downsize and save money where my monthly payments are going to be the same? It doesn't make sense. What's the point? So there will be a time where that will change. But for the moment, the way it's working is, people have just decided we're just going to go all in. Now, there's people who need to sell, who want to sell, and aren't. They will at some point. I don't know what that rate is. Might be 5, might be 5.5. I'm not sure. I'm just guessing. We won't know until we hit there. But there is a rate where people are going to say, you know what, it's time to sell. And we'll see a lot more inventory hit the market. That should depress prices a little bit. However, I don't know if prices are really going to decline. Now, the old pricing mechanism which worked when we had more of a free market, we don't have a free market now. It's very much managed. But we had more of a free market. The way it would work is rates go up, prices go down. Rates go down, prices go up. That's been the way it's worked for hundreds of years, up until like the last 20, when the pricing mechanisms have broken. Because if you look in the 70s, rates went up to 20%. Mortgage rates are 20% or more. And prices were low. But as soon as rates start to drop, prices went up. And we saw the 80s, the 90s, everything went up, and because you had lower and lower rates. That's how a free market is supposed to work. But it doesn't work that way anymore, because we've artificially manipulated it through many different mechanisms, the Fed and other. So it doesn't work as it should. So what does that mean for you? Well, what it means is basically, and we'll get into this next week with the new paradigm, is as we have a lot more inflation and the Fed is still printing money and we're still, basically increasing the money supply, as that happens, inflation happens in asset prices. The worst place to be is if you don't have assets. As long as you have assets, you're in good shape. If you don't have assets, you're in trouble. That's the truth of it. So poor people are in deep doo-doo, is the technical term, because they don't have assets, and assets do well in inflationary times. And if you don't have assets, you're screwed. So the way I'm kind of looking at it is, even if prices do decline, as long as you're not moving in 5 years, if you're going to live there for 20 years, buy a house. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what the price is. It does, but it also kind of doesn't, because as rates go down, you can refinance. Your monthly costs will get lower and lower. So don't be afraid of real estate. However, this is locationally dependent. Now, I live in Boston, the Boston area. Prices really never decline. Even in '08, they didn't really decline. They went down like 7%, or the rest of the country was down like 50 in some areas. So we have started to see price decline in Texas and Florida and other places, and I do think those will start to decline. So if you have a bag of money or looking to put it in real estate, I think patience is going to be a virtue for you. But there will be a point when interest rates get low enough where they're going to start to say, all right, we can balance it out. So just be aware. If you're trying to buy in some of those hot areas, you might want to hold off for a little bit. If you're in a place like Boston, it's not going to matter. Is inflation getting you down? Do you feel like your money is worth less every time you open your wallet? Is shrinkflation frustrating you at the grocery store? Well, I have an answer for you. We're giving away free money. That's right, I said it, free money. I feel like I'm not doing my part to create inflation. Why does the government get to have all the fun? What could be better at increasing inflation than giving away free money? No, I'm not an employee of the Federal Reserve. And no, I'm not an employee of the US government either. And no, I am definitely not printing it myself. But it's free. What more could you ask? Well, you might ask, is it real? Well, yes, it's totally real. I'm holding it in my hands right here, see? Oh, wait, this is a podcast. You can't see it. Either way, I'm holding in my hands right now, and I want to give it to you. If you want some free money, go to moneytreepodcast.com/free money to get your free money today. Follow the instructions and I'll send some to you. Enjoy your free money today. I'm not the Federal Reserve, so I only have a limited supply. This offer is good until I run out. Go to www.moneytreepodcast.com/free money to get your free money today. Doug, where should we go next? Because I know we got a bunch of stuff. We had the Fed talk.
Yeah, just to tag on a little bit of what you said, I think, don't be afraid to buy real estate, but also don't make sure you're doing it within what you can afford. Okay. When it comes down to it's not just the payment. And too many times we see rent versus mortgage. Oh, look, you got to remember all the other costs that go into it. Like, depending on where you're at, capital gains. One thing that kills people in Texas, there's no state tax, but those property taxes are brutal. And you're talking 10, many cases over $10,000 for a nominal house there just to be able to afford it. Because these states got to get their revenue somewhere. So you got to make sure you count on that. A house is probably bigger than an apartment. It's going to have more expensive utilities. Now you got responsibility for all of the repairs and maintenance and mowing and all of that stuff that's going on with it. And this is where people get themselves in trouble, Kirk. The other thing, and I've said this before, I'll stress again, if this is not the perfect example of why you have to understand good debt versus bad debt, like a lot of people rush to pay off their mortgages, okay? And because they want that debt gone. But if you're sitting there at 2.x%, on your mortgage or better, some people better or slightly, worse than that. Heck, even 4. But Kirk just said that payment's going to be the same forever. Now, it's going to change if you got escrow with insurance and taxes and all that other stuff. But the mortgage payment itself is fixed. Okay. And as he said, if there's going to be other areas that are going to get more expensive in an inflationary environment, then you're going to find that, you have to think about this. Do I put my money towards something that's actually getting cheaper over the next 20 to 30 years? Because it is. If you've got a fixed payment, 20 to 30 years from now, it's the same payment. But guess what? If you looked at a payment 20 to 30 years ago and looked at today and asked yourself, if I still had that payment now, would it be bothering me? No. Because what might have been 25% of your income then might be 5% of your income now, if not less. Everything else got more expensive. So now you have to really consider, where do I put my money? Putting it towards things that appreciate. Extra payments don't appreciate. I know you might think it, hey, the house is getting, no, the house is going to go up or down regardless of your payments. Okay. So going to acquire more assets or buy more stocks, which is an asset, or anything that you can do to put your money in somewhere that can keep up with inflation. could be, and again, could be, I don't know your situation, a better decision than putting your money towards something that's actually going to decline in cost, relative cost over time. And I think, going back from, if we look at charts and things like that, and again, there's a lot of things you talked about there, but I put a couple things in here about just what is, what has happened, with regards to those inflation of assets. So I'm going to jump into another chart. Kirk, it's near the end if you can find it, but the dollar has lost 30% of its purchasing power. Now you're thinking, wow, that's a lot of time. Must be over 30 years. No, this is since 2016. This is according to Fred, which is the Federal Reserve. Okay. Consumer price index for all urban consumers. Now this is urban. All items, less food and energy in the U.S. city average has basically gone up, or 30% more cost just in those 7 years. Okay. So that's a significant devaluation of what the dollars you're taking in are able to buy. The state, so if we take a look at, and they put a chart on here about the minimum wage in Texas, whatever, this is not about Texas. You're basically, though, if you are having a fixed income, this is extremely painful. And that's what Kirk was talking about. The poor, if you don't have those assets, you're going to feel the impact of this significantly greater than someone else. And, Kirk was talking about people buying. We were looking at some stuff that we want to do for next year for travel. It's unbelievable. Like, we were just kind of looking at price shopping. This is a trip we were going to look at for Alaska. And the top tier items that you could buy, the room and board, they're all sold out already. It's incredible the amount of money that's being thrown at these, at these types of, these items. There's still, we talked about this last year, the year before that, the amount of M2 money supply that was put out there. Yeah, they have shown charts that have shown that M2 money supply finally becoming negative. But just because the M2 money supply is shown negative, there's a lot of money in places that people don't understand. And people, of course, with the internet, there's a lot more people making money in a lot of different ways these days, because actually there's another chart on here, which I thought was really interesting. It's like, okay, where's this money coming from? There's actually, they've actually shown that there has been a significant revision of jobs out there. So the U.S. job additions revised lower. This was posted. So Kabisi Letter posted this. I believe I put the date of this. I'll have to pull it up here. I think it was just last week. Within the last 10 days. But basically, we've been talking about this. They said the jobs kept going up. Jobs kept going up. And one of the things we were talking about is, well, what, and not just us, but what does that mean? If jobs are going up, how is that possible? Because, there's just in the back of your head, they talk about gut feeling, right? Gut feeling is, geez, are we seeing a lot of people working? Or are we seeing a lot of people working multiple jobs? Well, they just went back and revised revised job additions by $818,000. Okay, that's the largest revision since the end of since we were in the middle of the Great Recession in 2009. U.S. unemployment rate now up to 4.3. That's the highest since 2021. So people are starting to see more job losses. 5 out of the last 6 jobs reports have now been revised lower. So they are finally admitting a record number of Americans are working multiple jobs. We talked about that. I just talked about that 30% reduction in purchasing power since 2016, 25% of that just in the last 4 years. And now we're also starting to see credit card balances. 11% of credit card balances are now delinquent. That's 1 out of every 10. That's massive. Okay. So we are starting now. Who's getting hit with that? Unfortunately, in many cases, it's going to be those at the bottom of the economic spectrum. But that is now going to be, trickling up. And that's what usually happens. You start to see, those at the lowest level of the economic, working multiple jobs, trying to make it happen, trying to keep up, or trying to support their families. Their kids are in the same, in the same schools, in the same, in the same world as others that have more, and you're just trying to do what you can for your family. And unfortunately, that causes creep that takes on debt because I'll deal with it later. Now, eventually, you start to see job losses start to occur at the kind of the more middle management level, and that's when things start to show a little bit more of an impact in the economy. If we actually take a look at where we are on jumping around here, but if we talk about rent prices again, who typically is going to be renting? Not everybody, but typically it's going to be those that are going to be less likely to be able to afford or struggle to get housing. Rent prices, the U.S. median rent price hit $1,481 a month in Q2 24. That is the rent that being since 2019, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, asking rents have spiked by a staggering 56%. So therefore, as a result, the median rent price now accounts, I believe, is 29% of the average monthly disposable income. Now, in 2019, it was only 24. Okay, so basically, rents have risen faster than post-tax household income. But guess what? If we take that in a bubble, that's one thing. But if we take and say, well, then that's another reason to buy. Well, unfortunately, and we've talked plenty about this as well. We have also seen that based on the cost of homes, so have mortgages, right? So is really housing in general has absolutely blown up everywhere. And that's become really, really difficult and increased the barrier of entry. And so for people to get into any kind of housing whatsoever. And so, therefore, having that house, you're lucky enough to have that home. Okay. And you're lucky enough to have that home at an affordable place, then consider yourself exceptionally lucky, whoever you are. Okay. Now, we are talking about homes not being, the homes not being available. Okay. And again, regionally, right? There are places where we're starting to see price drops, more availability. But understand that even if for those that have homes that have paid them off, those that are renting, if we start to see job increase, unemployment, rising unemployment, that's going to, there is still a number of people. And if your home is completely paid off, you still got lots of cost to maintain it. Now, you might have more flexibility than others. But again, I would argue you probably have even more flexibility if instead of rushing to pay off your home, you had bought those assets years earlier, instead put your money in different places to rise. But if you've only got 10 payments left on your home, okay, doesn't matter. If you lose your job tomorrow, that's 10 payments that you're going to have to figure out how to come up with. So, we're starting to see an increase in job losses, okay, slightly. We're up to 4.3% from a very low unemployment. So we're nowhere near the catastrophic levels that, people should be, concerned about. But we're starting to see, more decreasing labor force participation as well. There's another chart. The other thing to keep in mind is that the U.S. population is aging. More people are retiring. We are down to, we've gone from back in 1999, about 66% of the population was in the labor force. We're down under 60%. And we talked about that 45-degree angle of the S&P 500. It's almost, since 1999, there's been a 45-degree decreasing angle in the number of people in the labor force. Now, whether or not that's retiring, whether or not that's by force, by health, whatever that is, we've got less people working. So that's a trickle down on the tax system, of course, and that's more people drawing. But also, you're looking at, okay, the housing thing. If more people are retiring, eventually, and I've talked about this before, we're going to see those retirees moving on to mortality. And when mortality happens, when you take the baby boomers, which was the largest generation prior to the millennials, okay, and you start to see mortality creeping up there over the next 10 to 20 years, there's going to be a lot of assets that they hold on to, including housing, that is now going to come available. Now, some of that will pass on to their next generations. But depending on the timing that occurs, if you're a Gen Xer whose parent passes away, you've probably already got your house. You've probably already got assets. You may live somewhere else. So to inherit your parents' house, well, that's going to be something that's going to be, that's going to be something that you're going to, you're probably not going to want to deal with. Yep. And Kirk corrected me, 818,000 jobs. I think I said dollars. My apologies, as I'm rolling. But, you're not going to want to deal with that. So that's going to be a house that's going to be likely put up for sale. Even the millennials by that point may be in their, going to be in their 40s and their 50s, and they're probably going to be, have their own situation too. So while some people will absorb that of the next generation, in many cases, they're not going to want to, either because they can't afford the burden, or they don't want that burden. Okay. And especially when baby boomers have sometimes their main house, or they may have their cabin or a third property or a lot of apartments. A lot of what's going to happen is the next generation isn't necessarily going to want to assume that. Okay. So keep in mind that all of those variables could be part of a generational shift on that on that availability of vacancy and housing that will, again, regionally have an impact on prices to come. None of that's right. It's starting right now. But again, there's a shift, right? We need more housing, and they're building it left and right. Okay. But this has happened before. They build tons of homes. They build tons of apartments. Where's the best value you can get right now? New builds. Existing homes aren't available. So they build all of this extra stuff. And then what happens is you get a decline in the number of population that needs it, goes in waves. And now all of a sudden you get more supply and demand. And tie into that interest rate policy where mortgages are going to be. Obviously, the affordability impacts that as well.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Doug. We're going to wrap it up here in a minute. I did want to get into, obviously, the Fed. Powell was talking at Jackson Hole last week, and I wanted to kind of run through that a little bit, and then we'll kind of wrap it up. I know it's kind of a light week. No one's around. I'm sure I'll listen to this on vacation, but I wanted to at least kind of address some major things. So some of the things that Powell said are, so basically the market has been nudging Powell for like the last 2 years to start lowering rates because the market is addicted to lower rates. Now, higher rates impact the real estate market. They impact the bond market. They impact a lot of markets. But higher rates, when you're flooded, see, let me just kind of frame this. If you have no debt, then rates don't matter. As soon as you start adding debt, rates matter. So if you have a market that's accustomed to 7.5%, which historically 7.5 is kind of the range where rates would kind of balance. If you look back, decades, not the last 2 decades. The last 2 decades have been basically zero. But if you look back in history, 7.5 is kind of a normal range. And so when you have that much, you can only have so much debt. But when you have 0% rates, you can have as much debt as you want, right? It's kind of like the joke if the bank. So they actually wrote a blog post about this about 10 years ago, in where I think it was in Denmark, where banks were loaning money at negative rates to business owners. And the funny thing was the kind of business owner, and it was kind of like let's just say it had something to do with people taking their clothes off, but it was they had loaned money to this business, and effectively it was at a negative rate. So the joke is like, hey, if you can borrow money at negative 1%, how much would you borrow? Like, well, as much as you give me. I'll borrow money to go borrow money. Like, it's just like basically you're just getting paid to take money. So if you look at basically what's happened is rates have gone up because we've had inflation. And inflation has subsided, and we did not have the bullwhip effect because the inflation. And here's the thesis, right? So most people were saying, well, it's not transient; it's going to stay forever. It's going to keep going higher. We buy into that in many ways. However, if you look at what happened over the last few years since COVID, it spiked interest rates. Why? Was it because they printed a lot of money? No. But there's a correlation there, right? You say, well, they print a lot of money. That's what caused inflation. Not exactly. Because if it caused inflation, then all the other times we've done that, it would have caused inflation, and it didn't, right? Printing all that money. Now, it had an impact on asset prices, but it didn't on everything else. What impacted prices on goods and services and all that had to do with mostly the supply chain. And that is kind of balancing itself out now. So inflation is dropping, stated inflation. I want to be clear because Doug mentioned Fred a few times in some of these charts. And I want to be clear. That is the government provided data. Now, I don't believe a lot of the government provided data. However, it's all we got. So, right.
Here.
And so even though you don't believe it, it's all we got. So we have to have a base. We can't just make up numbers in thin air. We have to come up with some standard. We might not agree with the standard, but it's got to be a standard. So we all look at the standard and say, okay, great, this is the standard. Now, as Doug says, they had a big revision in jobs, lower by 800 and some odd thousand people.
That helps your trust of what the Fed put out before, doesn't it? And what they're putting out again?
It's not the Fed's fault. I don't want to put the blame on the Fed. I always put the blame on the Fed. I'm not going to put the blame on the Fed because they didn't come up with these numbers. They're just reporting them. So the Fred website is a Fed-sponsored website. I think it's the St. Louis Federal Reserve. It's their website. It's great data. It's not always accurate, but it's not coming from them. It's coming from our government, right? The government reports it. They put it up there, and then you can track it and use all these tools. It's a great website. I highly recommend it to everybody. Whether you agree with the numbers or not is a totally different issue, right? I don't agree with the numbers. And as we've seen, they've come out and said, oh, we're revising them down by 800,000 jobs. Well, that's not insignificant. I wonder why that happened. Maybe it was because of the Biden crime family that caused that to happen. I don't know. I just know the government numbers are frequently inaccurate. And so I'm not surprised when they came out and said, no, we didn't actually have a recession when the numbers showed that we had a recession, right? You kind of get to the point where you do this long enough, you just don't listen to all that because you know it's garbage. And you know what happened, and Wall Street knows what happened, and that's all that matters because the price is the price, and that's really, at the end of the day, all that matters. So anyway, circling back, Powell came out and said, we have high rates, we're going to be dropping them. I didn't hear the actual speech, but he indicated that likely in September's meeting, they're going to drop rates. I think that's kind of weird. You're dropping rates one time in September before an election. To me, it seems like Powell's vying to retire after this because if Trump gets in, anybody who's during election times, it's a very sensitive topic. When you're lowering rates, it boosts the economy and makes the incumbent have a better likelihood of success. So it's kind of a hot button for all parties. It's not just Trump. It's been going back decades where this has been the case. But if they're going to lower it in September, and then he said basically, any future cuts will be dependent upon incoming economic data, which to me sounds like I'm appeasing people by dropping rates by probably 25 basis points, and then I'm going to sit in my hands. There really isn't much of a reason to start dropping rates a lot unless they decide that, hey, things are getting really rough. I do want to point out one thing, and I don't have a chart at my fingertips, but if you look at a lot of people are saying, well, every time they've started to cut rates, it's led to a recession. That is a false narrative because dropping rates doesn't lead to a recession. That is a correlation, not a causation. The causation is, hey, the economy's not too good, so I'm going to lower rates. That is the cause. The Fed, I've been doing this long enough where I have my own historical wisdom. You can look at charts and not know this. And this is a learning point. We'll go over this again maybe next week. Huge learning point. If you're looking at a chart, you're going to draw a conclusion that because this happened, this happened. Because they're lowering rates, it caused a recession. It does not. What happens is you look at the economy is in rough shape, and the Fed says, hey, we're going to lower rates to stimulate the economy. So the cause is the poor economic conditions. The result is the Fed lowering rates. So that is the correlation causation in the truism of the word, right? The Fed doesn't just decide, oh, we're just going to lower rates and it's going to cause a recession. Why else would they ever lower rates if that was the case? It doesn't make sense. So what happens is as the Fed is starting to see some economic data, which is not good. They see more than we do. I'm seeing economic data that's starting to not look good, but it's still early, so you never really know. The Fed is saying, you know what, we should probably start to, lighten the load a little bit for the economy. Let's lower rates a little bit and let's see what happens. Inevitably, the Fed is always behind because you're talking like 6, 9, 12 months out. When a Fed does something, it takes a long time for that to impact the economy. So if the Fed lowered rates like 1%, the stock market might go up and the rest of the economy is still going to be in rough shape because it's still going to take a while to filter through the whole economy. That's why during COVID, Trump was really beaten on Powell to lower rates quickly. And it was the right move, frankly. I think you needed to lower rates quickly to give the market confidence so it boosted up. And what happened? The market ended up that year, which is crazy. But the point being is, as you're looking at this, as you're looking at lower rates, don't be fooled by they're lowering rates, it leads to recession. We might be headed into recession and they're lowering rates to help alleviate the pain of what that might cause. But we don't know. We're going to see it over the next 6, 12 months. We'll start to see whether what Powell is seeing is correct or incorrect. But you should know that they're talking about an easing cycle, not a tightening cycle. So if you think that inflation's going up, don't. Powell's been very clear about making sure that inflation doesn't come back. He's not seeing inflation coming back. If anything, he's seeing it cooling back to their normal target of 2%, which, by the way, if you don't know, the 2% was picked out of thin air. It was not based on any actual data. You talk to anybody on Wall Street, they'll tell you the same thing. No one knows why they came up with 2%. They just picked it out of thin air. So also, they're concerned about employment, which they're starting to see, and they're going to remain very flexible. So that's basically what we took away from Jackson Hole, is that we're into an easing cycle, and they're very concerned about the data and jobs, and they're going to try to be very flexible with what happens, which I think, frankly, is the right move. So we're going to, in the interest of time, we're going to stop it here. I'm going to give Doug a wrap up, and then we'll come back next week, and we'll really start laying down this new framework, this new paradigm shift that we've kind of tilted back to. And I want to give everybody that framework so that we can start thinking about how to invest going forward. So, Doug, where can we find more about you?
Well, thanks, Kirk. If you can find more about me at Mergent College Advisors, MERGENT, mergentcollegeadvisors.com. I've got a chart out there that I'm trying to find myself, for us to post, but basically, there has been a tremendous acceleration of college closures over the last decade. We're starting to see many, private, nonprofit, four-year college closures annually. They have more than doubled from 2015 to 2018. There is correlation between college closures and students from those colleges very often not going back to school, even though you can transfer the credits and you get those, any loans released from that. That many times what happens is they don't finish their degree, they don't go back to school. And because we're seeing more of that, it's just an indicator of how critical it is for you to make sure that you're having a great and diligent time with college selection, a critical part of it. And ultimately, it is financially critical for you to integrate college with your other goals, such as retirement, because ultimately, if you don't, what you're risking is potential of overextending, making choices that jeopardize those other goals. If you integrate college planning with your overall financial strategy, including retirement, it can ensure paying for college doesn't derail your financial security. And your child's going to end up in a great place where they'll hopefully walk off stage on Friday into a career on Monday. Because isn't that what we all want and hope for? That would allow you to be financially okay, to invest wisely in both your child's education and your own financial well-being. If that's important to you, okay, and it is absolutely critical. 95 to 99% of advisors out there do not integrate the two biggest expenses you're ever going to have, which is housing and college. Okay, and if I had that same philosophy, I would just tell you to go liquidate retirement accounts to pay for college, but that wouldn't work. So how come your other financial plans aren't taking these things into consideration? If that's your situation, if that's the advice you've received, make sure that you're putting college, housing, and all of the pieces holistically together, and start by learning a little bit more at our site, Mergent College Advisors.
Great. Thanks, Doug. Thanks for joining us again. That's the show for this week. Thank you again for joining us on Money Tree Investing Podcast. My name's Kirk Chisholm, wealth manager of Innovative Advisor Group. We don't just manage your wealth, we make your life better. You can find more about me at innovativewealth.com. And of course, you can find me every week here on this show. You can also check out our show at Money Tree Investing Podcast. On our website, you'll have access to the show notes, resources, and the archive shows. Please remember to subscribe on our YouTube channel for immediate access to the new shows when they're released. When you subscribe to the show, it allows us to get access to some of the top minds of investing in personal finance. While you're here, please leave a comment and question if you want us to address it on the show. Have a great week ahead, and remember, no one will care about your money like you do, so invest in your life.